I thought you might want to listen to that investor call, the call between Elizabeth Holmes and several of the Theranos investors. Now, what statements did Elizabeth Holmes make? What representations did she make regarding the technology, regarding the military, regarding the pharmaceutical companies? Were those statements truthful or were they fraudulent, as the prosecution alleges? Okay, so please do subscribe to my channel. Please support my channel by subscribing. And if you'd like to donate, I put a donation link in the description box below the video. Please hit that like button, hit the bell notification, and do join me for our live stream tomorrow, May 5th from 12:15 to 1:15 California time. I'll talk about the Balwani trial, possibly Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, and the Supreme Court, that leaked opinion, that leaked abortion opinion, and more. So please do join me for the live stream. If you want to send your comments or your questions ahead of time, please do. And please leave your comments. I want to know what your analysis is of this investor call. All right, so just to give you the heads up, it's approximately 20 to 30 minutes in total. We're going to look at 7 different recordings because what they did is they spliced up the call into 7 different recordings. So I'm going to play you those and you can make the call. What's your analysis? So please do leave a comment. All right, so the first recording here. Let's take a look. All right, so let's go to the first one.
Absolutely. Well, it's wonderful to speak with you all, and it's wonderful to be in a place in which we can begin to talk about this. As you all know, we have been working very hard for a long time to build out this infrastructure, and when I started the company, we knew that it would take us a long time to be able to establish an infrastructure that could do any lab test that is run in a traditional lab from a microsample, or these tiny droplets that we take now from the finger. And we thus built the business around our partnerships with pharmaceutical companies and our contracts with the military, wherein we could deploy our framework in the one case for helping to accelerate clinical trials, and in the other for extreme use case situations in trauma and other areas where there was a very compelling value proposition in order to build out our test menu and our infrastructure to be able to get to this point. Several years ago, we realized that we had created an infrastructure that could, in fact, make it possible to get rid of phlebotomy, or the big tubes of blood that are drawn from the arm, in its entirety. And we began this work to be able to create a framework wherein, working with insurance companies, working with Medicare, working with Medicaid, working with physician and hospital groups, and now retail, we could establish what has the opportunity to be ultimately the largest lab in the country. And most importantly, to change the reality in lab testing today, which is that it's very painful. 50% of the population doesn't do it in terms of compliance with the requisition from a physician to do a test, because the fear of needles is such a great phobia, and equally the fear of having to wait long periods of time for the results deters many people from getting tested in the first place, because they don't want to be sitting around worrying whether they're positive with something or not, for example.
Okay, so were those statements truthful or not? To do any, I heard her say, to do any lab test, they could do any lab test, a microsample droplets from the finger. Well, was that true? In the Holmes case, several witnesses said that wasn't true. They weren't able to do any lab test, and they were doing venous draws. They weren't only doing finger stick tests. She also talked about contracts with the military. Was that true at the time? And with the pharmaceutical companies. Was that true at the time? So let's take a look at the next recording here. Let's listen to the next recording. Okay, so.
And so now in this framework that we've created, we've built the opportunity for people to be able to do their tests in a whole new way, become more compliant with being able to get access to this laboratory data, which is incredibly powerful information that drives so much of clinical decision making, and in doing so create a richer data framework for the purpose of being able to better characterize the progression of certain conditions by virtue of the fact that not only are we helping to get people tested, because it's a small sample, we can get people tested at the needed frequencies, and because the sample is fresh and it's not, a big series of tubes of blood that are sitting on a counter and exposed to temperature, we don't suffer the rates of decay of key analytes that happen when you ship samples off to a central lab. And then by virtue of the fact that our analytical infrastructure is standardized, so we don't have the variability that is associated with traditional laboratory testing, meaning today if you go to a lab in San Francisco and you go to a lab in LA, on the same day for the same value, one could report a result that is, for example, on a test like HDL cholesterol, plus or minus 30% from some standard, and be considered accurate in the eyes of regulators, which means on the same day for a single test, based on the fact that each lab is centralized, has its own lab director, has its own reference range, uses its own equipment, which is different from what other labs use, you could see a 60% variance in data. And if you start to think about how that compounds over time, it makes it very difficult to look longitudinally at the progression of a condition by virtue of the fact that there's so much noise between time points. And here, because this is a single framework and we have built this out in such a way in which we have a less than 5% variance on our test, if we begin to see a change of 30% in patient values over time, it's because it's clinical. And this is a richness of data for the physician community that has not been accessible before, and it allows the physician to begin looking at laboratory data in the same way that people talk about looking at a test for cancer, prostate cancer, called PSA, which is they focus more on the rate of change or its velocity than they do on its absolute concentration at any given point in time. And we're going to be able to start presenting this laboratory information in that way so that it can be used more toward early detection.
Okay, so you might want to listen to, or actually watch, the video I did, Tyler Schultz Calls Out Elizabeth Holmes, because in that video I show you the email, the scatter plots that Tyler had sent Elizabeth Holmes, letting her know that he wasn't seeing the less than 5% variance that she just talked about. And also, Elizabeth Holmes made statements there about small sample of blood, tubes of blood. Were those statements truthful or were those fraudulent? All right, let's take a look at the next piece of the recording here.
We have launched our retail infrastructure. We are operating now in California and in Arizona. We have opened our first stores and have patients coming in live every day. We are working to expand that as fast as possible. The speed with which we expand is critical in the context of capturing the market opportunity that we have created, and we are putting a lot of resources into establishing a national footprint as fast as we can. But that starts with excellence in each local market and capturing market share in each local market, which is where we are focused now. And as we do that, we're leveraging capital from our strategic partners and also from equity opportunities that we have on the table to be able to grow very fast. And as you all know, we have recently issued shares at $75 a share. For reference, the initial investment in Theranos that you all made was at 82 cents. So we are already creating significant value, and of course, we're just getting started in the context of being able to establish and roll out this infrastructure. As we go forward into 2014, in addition to the speed of scale, putting the resources into the business to be able to build the organizations that are required to handle this type of consumer business is another core area of focus for us. Obviously, a great contract in the context of a pharmaceutical deal could be very great financially, but it was very small, relatively speaking, in the context of volume. Next to what we're facing now, there's 7 million people in the Bay Area and 39 million in California, and that scale is very different from the scale on which we've operated in the past. So we're very focused on being able to establish the operational framework to be able to handle that type of volume, and it's an area that we're spending a lot of time on now. The retail infrastructure is the foundation for being able to reactivate a lot of the pharmaceutical programs that we did that allowed us to build the business from cash from operations since we did our Series C round in 2006. And there's a very strong synergy between the ability to run clinical trials at retail and the ability to speed enrollment and better demonstrate that it's possible to deliver therapies in a new way by virtue of the fact that this testing can be done practically inside a retail pharmacy where the drug is delivered in and of itself. So the focus on the pharmaceutical business is still a significant focus for us and will continue effectively as a business unit as we now grow, and will be very synergistic with what we've established in retail. So maybe, Chris, let me pause there and just see out of what I've said so far if there's questions on anything we've covered up to now.
Okay, so that Chris, I think she's referring to is Chris Lucas with Black Diamond Ventures. And they invested the they invested the 5.349 million, which is count 4 in the Sunny Balwani case and in the Elizabeth Holmes case. Okay, she also said about growing very fast in the shares. All these investors invested at 82 cents per share when she had it valued at 75. So very interesting. All right, let's take a look at the next clip here, or listen to the next clip. So this is number 4.
Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth. I guess a two-part question. First of all, if you could just cover generally the current capitalization in terms of what the at $75 a share, what the capitalization would be, and what you're looking to raise. And I take it from what you said, but maybe you could go into a little more of the use. Is it heavily weighted toward the retail build out, which you're looking to do on a national basis? And how long do you expect time-wise to do the build out of the retail side?
Absolutely. So, so when you all came in the Series B, pre-money was about $20 million valuation of the company, and that was, previously associated with the Series A price of 75 cents a share. Now the valuation of the company is just over $7 billion, and that's at the $75 a share. The retail is exactly where we're focusing our investment, and it's really now a question of how fast do we scale. What the fact that we will scale is a given. Our retail partners have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in building out this framework, and we too have been preparing for this for many years now. The goal is to be able to be national very, very quickly. So the immediate focus is California and Arizona. Certainly, as we go into 2014, one of our goals for 2014 is to have those markets as beachheads in terms of really owning the marketplace and being able to expand from them. But the ability to expand throughout retail, once you've operationalized a given market, is it's not very complicated. And companies like Walgreens have done this very well in areas like the flu shot or vaccination business, where they trained all their pharmacists and had it deployed nationally within, I think, about an 18-month period. And there's a parallel to what can be done here, and we're working to do that.
Okay, so here's the next clip.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Larry Gertz. Please go ahead. Larry, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, Elizabeth. It's Larry Gertis.
Hi, Larry. How are you?
Good, good. Congratulations on all this progress.
Well, thank you.
Now, Elizabeth, you mentioned that you might have some additional equity rounds that are coming up. Can you give any indication of how much money you want to raise and what market caps you'd like to see yourself achieve in those rounds?
Sure, absolutely. So this recent transaction at $75 a share is actually part of contracts that we have with strategic entities and partners who previously had an equity relationship with Theranos and had an option to exercise to invest additional capital before the end of 2013, which they literally just exercised. And so we're working through that now, as many of you all know, with some of the recent shareholder consents. And that valuation that I previously mentioned is associated with those transactions. We do have offers on the table right now from financial institutions that are in the several $100 million range in terms of the amount of capital, and we're considering that in the context of how we invest. And also, we're aware that certain shareholders have some liquidity needs, and so the ability to put a large amount of capital into the company and then, where and as relevant and at the right time for the business, address that liquidity is how we're looking at that. And there's a very high likelihood that we will do transactions that are in the several $100 million range. Insofar as the valuation, we know that it is higher than $75 a share. We are having negotiations right now about exactly what price we pick, and more importantly, who we pick as the investor base here, and some of this in terms of what the actual price per share and therefore the associated equity capitalization of the company will be is going to depend on how that plays out. But that's something that is going on as we speak, and will likely be affected early in Q1.
Okay, so here's the next clip.
Hi, Elizabeth. Also, congratulations from us. It's remarkable what you've accomplished. Just to follow on what you were just discussing, I assume that would all be private. I'm wondering if you see a public liquidity event at some point where you go out with an IPO. Wondering about that, and as long as I'm speaking, I was also curious if there's a military aspect that you're going to pursue. And again, since I have the floor, with regard to competition, Chris had mentioned that there doesn't appear to be any out there. I'm wondering if your patent side is looking at any concerns there, if you think there's any possibility for patent infringement or others doing something similar and competing with you.
Absolutely. I will start with the first one. So these immediate transactions, when we're talking in the December, January, early Q1 timeframe, are all private transactions. We have put a corporate structure in place that positions us to be able to proceed with future equity-related events and retain the control to realize the long-term vision that we have. And as you all know, this company is about being able to change the healthcare industry, and that's something that we plan on doing for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. We have the opportunity to create an industry here, and that's what this is about. So we have always been very long-term in our mindset. The potential for some type of public transaction, public offering transaction down the road is there. Right now, we think there's a lot of advantages to continuing to operate as a private company, especially in the context of what we've just done, where we made some very difficult decisions when we signed our retail contracts to effectively agree to contracts that said we couldn't talk about this because these companies were putting hundreds of millions of dollars into the infrastructure and they hadn't announced it to the street, and it was material and non-public information, and some of it still is. And so what we got out of that is we got a lead time, and we were able to launch and really surprise the market in terms of the existence of this capability, and there's a lot of power in that from a market ownership standpoint. But we are looking at liquidity options, and an IPO would be one of them. In terms of the military aspect of this, military is a big deal for us, and I can tell you confidentially a couple of the areas in which we've been focused there. One, in the context of work in the Middle East and specifically in Afghanistan, the survival rate of our men and women in field when they're hit is 98% if they get through the doors of an emergency room within 60 minutes from the point of injury. And if we miss that window, that's where the bulk of our fatalities occur. And so the ability to take a technology like this and put it in flight, specifically on a medevac, has the potential to change survival rates. And what it does is it makes it possible to begin transfusion and stabilization in flight. And so we've been doing a lot of work there. We've also been doing a lot of work for Special Operations Command in the context of missions in remote areas where not only is there no capability to do testing for certain things that need to be measured, but if situations arise in which those tests are warranted, the mission is aborted and people are evacuated, generally out of continent. And so we have created a distributed system that can be used in remote areas, and that is another big area of focus for us. And as we now reach this stage in our business, and going back to the comment that I made earlier on organization, that really is another business unit. And so that the pharmaceutical business and retail are these three units that we have. Obviously, to be able to do what we've just done, we had to pause a large number of our ongoing pharmaceutical and military programs so that we could focus like a laser on this and executing on this. And the scale of this retail infrastructure now is where we will continue to focus like a laser. But as we get the resources and organization to capture some of these additional opportunities in parallel, we will proceed with the pharmaceutical and military business, leveraging some of this infrastructure and the resources from it that we're building out now. So that for the long term will be an important thing for us. And it's also very symbolic because it's our way of being able to help make a difference in whatever small way we can there.
Okay, so working with the military is a big deal, and remote areas and medevac, were those truthful statements or not? All right, so here is the last clip.
Insofar as competition is concerned, exactly the reason that we were so aggressive about being in stealth mode was to preserve the window for capturing as much market share as possible without direct competition. We have not seen other companies doing this.
Okay, so that was the investor call. That was Elizabeth Holmes making statements to these investors, and why it matters was the timing of this call and the representations that she made. Were they truthful or were they fraudulent, as the prosecution alleges? Okay, so what's your analysis? What do you think of those statements, those representations that Elizabeth Holmes made to these investors? Do you think they relied on those representations before they invested, 10, 11 days later, when it looks like those three counts, it's about, if I did my math right, about $11 million that those three investors, Alan Eisenman, Chris Lucas from Black Diamond, and Bryan Tolbert invested 10 and 11 days after this investor call. So please leave your analysis, leave a comment, leave a question. Do join me for the live stream tomorrow, May 5th, from 12:15 to 1:15. So thank you very much for subscribing. Please do subscribe. Please do support my work. Thanks for watching. And hit that like button.